Let's talk about feelings and how we can use the window of tolerance model to understand and handle our feelings a bit better. So when we're in the window of tolerance, we feel calm, like we can handle whatever's going on at that time in our lives. Today I'm showing you a way of understanding the window of tolerance, and more importantly some ways to be able to widen your window of tolerance for emotions. So let's look at a narrow window of tolerance first. So it's likely that you have greater tolerance to some emotions rather than others, while some will stop you in your tracks. So for example, you may feel fear about doing something, perhaps a job interview or walking into a situation where there's people that you're not really on good terms with, but be able to do that thing anyway. And perhaps when you feel humiliated, that might be the emotion that you struggle with the most and might paralyze you into moving forward. And that looks like this. So you can see that the window of tolerance there is very narrow. So while you can absolutely live your whole life with a narrow window of tolerance for some emotions, it's really not much fun, as it pushes you to either feel hyper-aroused or hypo-aroused, and that looks like this. So hyper-arousal is when we feel stressed, we feel overwhelmed, extremely anxious, and hypo-arousal is where we feel shut down or withdrawn, we want to isolate from others and can feel quite depressed. So the good news, we can widen our window of tolerance for certain emotions. Well, for any emotion where we've got a narrow window of tolerance really. And that looks like this. So you can start this today, and I'm going to show you 7 ways of widening your window of tolerance for any emotions that you identify that you have a narrow window of tolerance for. Number 1 is identify what your triggers are to feeling either hyper-aroused, overwhelmed and stressed, or hypo-aroused and low, depressed and withdrawn. And knowing this stuff is so helpful as it gives you your why into trying the next 6 steps. Number 2, breathing to calm. Now when we're hyper-aroused, we want to calm our limbic system, so our sympathetic nervous system or our stress response. So we need kind of longer, even, slower breaths. So perhaps in for 4, out for 4, in for 4, out for 4, sometimes called square breathing. When we're hypo-aroused, however, we need a different breath work for this. So with this one, we want to stimulate some energy. And the best one I found to do this is using Dr. Huberman's breathing practice. And that is breathing in for 2 and out for 1, like this. And you probably only need to do a few breaths before you start feeling a little bit dizzy. So make sure you sat down while you're doing this one. But it's a way of getting lots of oxygen into our system quickly, and it can be a really good strategy for helping us take the first step into acting how we want to act, rather than letting that withdrawn feeling overtake us. Number 3 is mindfulness. I talk about this all the time, no apologies for that. It's really, really helpful in bringing us back to the present moment, because often when we are hyper-aroused or hypo-aroused, we've been taken out of the present moment. We've either jumped into the future and we're seeing the worst case scenario, or we are ruminating over past events or situations. It's really unhelpful for our brain. So mindfulness can be really helpful because it brings us back to the present moment. You can be mindful of your breath, like in step 2, you can be mindful of an activity that you're doing in that moment. And you can also be mindful of your body, what's happening in your body. If you're brave enough to go in and watch and become curious about an emotion, then that's a really good way of bringing yourself to the present moment. You can also do that in describing the room you're in, anything that will bring you back to what's happening right now. Step 4, become your own soother. So you can use all of your senses for this, but what can be really helpful, certain scents. So lavender can be really helpful to calm if we're feeling hyper-aroused and overwhelmed. Lemon can be really helpful if we're hypo-aroused and feeling quite low and depressed. These are ways of stimulating our senses. We can also use a sense of touch and have something soft. We can use something that has different textures, like a shell. That can also be a way of grounding ourselves in the present moment as well. And on the subject of self-soothing, brings us on to step number 5, compassion. If this is making sense and you feel like you can put these steps into practice, please write yes in the comments below. So back to compassion, and what I mean by this is self-compassion and how we relate to ourselves. It is super, super important that we're relating to ourselves in a kind, compassionate way. And the reason for this is if we are being self-critical and beating ourselves up, what happens in our limbic system, because it's a part of the brain that cannot tell what's real or imagined, it acts the same way as if somebody was being very critical. So to soothe and be kind to ourselves, the limbic system also doesn't know whether that's somebody else speaking to us in that way or ourselves, so reacts accordingly by stimulating much more helpful chemicals in our body, and it stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest, relax, digest system. So we just feel generally calmer. Step 6 is writing or drawing your feelings. This is a really good way of distancing yourself, perhaps changing your perspective on those feelings. People have told me over the years the thing that stops them is that they worry that other people might see what they've written or drawn, and it stops them from getting it out of their head onto paper. The act of doing this is still beneficial even if we rip that stuff up or shred it so that other people don't see. The act of writing and drawing it is still helpful because it changes our perspective. And finally, step 7, move your body. When the stress response is kicked off, the body releases a lot of adrenaline, and that's fine when we're faced with a threat where we have to run away or fight or get somewhere and hide. That's fantastic response. However, most of the threats nowadays that we have are just in our own head, and they still trigger the threat response in our body, because remember what I told you earlier, that the limbic system can't tell what's real or imagined, so it acts on a just in case basis. So we have a surge of adrenaline, and it's designed to help us. However, we're just sat in our own living room or bedroom and we don't actually need to fight or run away from anything at all. To use up that adrenaline is really important. So move your body. However, go for a walk. I don't know, I've often done 10-star jumps, and I think whatever you want to do is fine. If you're chair-based, then there's nothing wrong with moving your arms. Just do something to move your body. It will help. So if you've tried any of these at all, let me know how it went, and also this week let me know how it goes. Remember that extending your window of tolerance or widening your window of tolerance actually allows you greater tolerance of emotions. That is massively beneficial in a world where we are bombarded with stressful information. And it's also a really powerful tool, considering that we can't control how situations are going to pan out or how other people are going to behave. So actually being able to increase our tolerance to certain emotions and actually having control over that through these really simple steps, we are focusing on what we can control rather than what we can't control, which makes us feel calmer anyway. Please see the next video on values so that you can put this into practice, and I will see you again Sunday. Please subscribe and click the notification bell so that you don't miss any new videos, and I will see you again very soon. Take good care of yourself.